Thank you so much, and welcome to today's session about ADHD burnout. It's important really that, when we're thinking about burnout, I know you're all just dying to get to the strategies, but it's important to think about what burnout actually is, how it looks, how we can identify it, what's causing the burnout so we can put strategies into place to avoid getting to that point. And then we'll look at strategies for actually in the moment. So just think about, just for a minute, the last time you felt burnt out. What did that mean to you? I'm not asking you to answer me or anything like that, but just to consider what you identify burnout being. Do you identify it as being a frazzled brain, or just physical tiredness? Or do you identify it as being just dysregulation and nervousness? We all experience burnout differently. And, like me, little picture on the screen here, it's like when our battery is empty, when we're depleted. So general burnout, when we talk about it in general terms, it's a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. Okay, so just think about those things. There's not just one element to it. There's multiple elements to burnout. However, if any of those three elements that I've just mentioned there, if any of them get really, really impacted, then you will see that knock-on effect on the other two as well. So yeah, that general burnout might be the emotional, physical, or mental exhaustion from prolonged stress. When we're talking about stress, stress can be big things, but it can also be those little things that add up and add up and add up. When we're talking about neurodivergent burnout, so for those with ADHD, it refers perhaps to the overwhelming exhaustion. Though those ADHD individuals have lots of challenge in daily life, don't they? And whether you can appreciate that from yourself, or whether it's your children, or whether it's your friends and family. If you think about perhaps the different elements of the day that just add on those challenges, that might be time blindness, that might be organization challenges, that might be mental fatigue, that might be emotional dysregulation, that might be the expectations placed on you from your peers or your school or your parents. It might be because that light's flickering, and it might be because that noise is annoying me, and it might be I'm too hot or too cold, or my clothes are scratchy. All of these things just build up, don't they? You might be aware of the fizzy pop analogy. So all of these things are like shaking that bottle of fizzy pop until it explodes. So really, in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about ND burnout, ADHD burnout. Okay, so how do we know somebody is experiencing burnout? How do we know? What does it look like? So like I said before, it looks different in every single one of us. But on screen here, we've got some things that we might be able to see. So we might see fatigue. So fatigue is different than just a little bit of tiredness. Fatigue, is all impacting, our mental energy, our physical energy, even for things that we enjoy doing. If we're fatigued, we're not going to be as involved, as energetic, as motivated. We might see somebody with increased sensory sensitivities. So we might see that actually, busy rooms is really causing us challenge, smells, textures. So think about our sensory environment. We don't just have the 5 senses, sight, touch, smell, taste. What's the other one? Hearing. Yeah, we don't just have those 5. We have our vestibular input, which is like our body's spirit level, if you like, that tells us where we are in relation to our surroundings. Our proprioceptive input, which is our body's sat nav, if you like, for itself, that tells us where we are in relation to our own body and where we are in relation to the pressure we need to utilize. And then we have our interoception, which is our internal senses that tell us when we're hungry, when we're full, when we're in pain, when we need the toilet. So in any one of those 8 sensory domains, we might see increased sensory sensitivities, or actually, we might even see decreased. So we might see people not responding to sensory sensitivities and, going, flat or dull. And that's the thing with burnout. We might see outward, but actually there's a lot of inward as well. When somebody's experiencing burnout, we might see physical clues, frequent headaches, a really prominent sign, I suppose. Headaches, muscle tensions, aches and pains. So our children and young people might be telling us, oh, I'm sore, oh, my head's spinning, I've got a headache. And the next one, they're digestive issues, feeling sick, maybe even vomiting, maybe having stomach cramps, go in the toilet often. And sometimes when we have children with unexplained physical signs, we might say, oh, actually, you haven't got a temperature, you haven't been poorly, there's nothing going around, you're fine. And sometimes that's the case. However, sometimes these internal physical signs that don't necessarily have any clear cue might be those first signs we know of that tension building, that stress building, the emotional, physical, or mental fatigue. So if we're seeing unexplained illness, unexplained pains, well, that might be our cue. Sleep issues. So that might be children who used to sleep well, but now don't sleep or have difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep. If there's any change in your child's sleep pattern, even including staying in bed longer, not wanting to get up of a morning, all of these could be signs of burnout. We might see outward behavior responses. So we may well see oppositional behaviors, fighting, crying, arguing, all of these things that we'd normally put down to behavior, not complying with what we're asking. And we might see school attendance issues. Some of those school attendance issues might be because I feel sick, or I've got a pain, or I need to go to the toilet, I've got frequent toilet trips. So things like that might affect attendance. It might be that oppositional, no, I'm not going, I can't go. So all of these things are signs of burnout. Our cognitive signs. So the cognitive signs, where we've just looked there perhaps of physical signs, our cognitive signs are what's going on for us. So we might see big emotional outbursts. We might see emotional numbness, that paring down, not responding, not showing joy, not showing happiness, not showing sadness, not showing anger, and just being quite flat. We might see an increase in irritability or frustration, short tempers, frequent mood changes and short tempers. We might see being, irritated by things that wouldn't normally irritate us. Siblings is a really, really prominent thing from the families that I talk to. Often families are telling me, oh, well, they normally get on with their brother or their sister, but now everything about the brother annoys them, irritates them. You're breathing too loud, you're in my space, you're touching me, that was my cup, all of those types of things. So we might see that increased irritability, decreased motivation. So in things that actually we always enjoy, we always like doing that, we like going to that place, we like being with that person. But actually, if we stop wanting to do those things, if it's harder to get us motivated, to get us up and running, to get us to school or get us to club or get us to do our homework. So what I think we're talking about here is changes in our motivation levels. So for some children, that's always going to be a struggle. But if you notice a change, a decrease in the motivation, and like it said, it's even with things that we like doing. If we know normally for football practice, we're first out the door because we love it. But actually, if we're like, oh, it's raining, can't be bothered, I've got tummy ache, or can't I just stay in? All of those are signs that that motivation is dipping. Or the cognitive signs, trouble concentrating, forgetfulness, brain fog, issues with work and memory, and feeling isolated and disconnected, not feeling part of what's going on. All of these can signify feeling burnt out. Perhaps reflect on your child and their friendship groups. Can you identify times where they're feeling disconnected from their friendship group? They're all wanting to do that and I don't want to do that. Or I don't feel like I'm included. I feel like I'm on my own. And perhaps that forced isolation of wanting to be on their own. And then there's behavioural signs. So, similar to what I've just been saying, that withdrawal from social activities, from relationships. We might see a reduce in language, so functional language. So functional language is where we might strip back all of the niceties or conversational stuff. We might respond in yes, no answers, or the very bare minimum to convey what we need to say. So bringing it right down to just that functional stuff. I don't want salad. I want pizza. I want the blue top. My bath's too cold. So I'm wondering whether you can think back to, a time when your child might have reduced their language right the way down to that functional language. Negative, hostile, or oppositional behaviours. So a little bit like we were saying before, a change in how we respond to our family, to our friends, to our school. We might see a decline in personal hygiene or self-care. Not brushing our teeth, or we don't care if our hair's just a little bit dishevelled as we're going out. We don't care if we slop down our top. We don't care if our shoes aren't matching or our socks aren't matching. We don't care if we haven't had a shower for days. All of these behaviour signs that actually our child or young person is having a tough time. Having a tough time, and it may well be because of that ADHD burnout. Loss of interest, so that interest might be in hobbies that we go and do. It might be in things we like to do alone, reading, playing chess, singing, playing with friends. That might all just be a little bit pared back or dulled down. So then we've thought there about some like internal causes, external causes. External causes are things that are happening in our environment that we have little control over. And when we feel like we have little control, we're more likely to feel vulnerable, to feel burnt out, exhausted, fatigued. So external causes could be things like sensory overload. So again, think of all of our senses and think about the environments we're in. In the classroom, is there a flickery light? In school, is the dinner hall just so overwhelming? What about at home? Is home really, really busy? Have we got a comfortable space where we can feel comfortable textures and regulate in that way? So think about all of those external sensory issues. Demands and expectations on others can leave us feeling really, really burnt out. You know, you must do this. I need you to do this. Have you done your homework? Have you took the bins out? Have you walked the dog? Have you done your exercises for gymnastics class? These are all demands. And when we're regulated and well, these demands might be motivating for us. They might be welcomed. However, when we're experiencing burnout, these demands might become really, really overwhelming. We might end up over-promising, yes, I can do that, and yes, I'll get that done, and yes, I'm doing that. So over-promising, you know, so maybe miscommunicating what actually we can do. And they've got rejection sensitivity as well. So those demands from other people might bring on that sense of, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I can't do all of this. I must be, I don't know, no good. I mustn't be bright enough. I mustn't be fast enough. I mustn't be clever enough. I mustn't be loving enough. And that rejection sensitivity of, I'm not enough. I can't do what they're asking will put us further into that dysregulation and increase that burnout. External causes: being still, not being able to regulate ourselves by movement. If you've attended any of my webinars before, you'll know that movement is so, so very important. It's a way that we can moderate. It's a way that we can self-regulate. It's a way that we can burn off excess energy. It's a way that we can focus. So being still for somebody with ADHD, even if it's not hyperactive ADHD, even if it's inattentive type, movement is really, really important. So when we're limiting movements, that might be in class, it might be in a traffic jam, it might be in church, it might be in the queue in Sainsbury's. Limiting movements and being still can perpetuate those feelings of fatigue and feelings of burnout and overwhelm. Social exhaustion. Often we're that busy, lots of things packed into our day. We're having to cope with different changes of circumstances. We're having to cope with different expectations from different people, whether that's school, whether that's parents, whether that's grandparents, whether that's friends, whether that's, I don't know, club. All of these different settings mean that we're having to interact. We've got to know the social nuances for each and every one of those settings. We've got to perhaps maintain our posture, our composure in each of those sessions. We may well be masking certain elements of our self in some of these different things. So the transition between all of this is exhausting for somebody with ADHD. May well be adding into that overwhelm. And then school pressure, difficulty in managing our time, getting to school on time, managing our day, understanding what's involved in, you know, the lesson and the seating arrangement and the pairing up, and what do we do at lunchtime, and who do we play with at playtime, and what about homework? Can I fit that in? School pressure can be really, really big in adding to burnout. So back to internal causes. We spoke about some of those physical and cognitive and emotional stuff before. Masking. Lots of people associate masking with autism. However, ADHDers do an awful lot of masking as well. Camouflaging they can do, what they can't do, camouflaging how they're feeling. So quite often, our children and young people are taking their cues from other people and trying to fit in to all those different situations. Think what I'd said before about those social settings. Think about how fatiguing that will be. Think about how potentially dysregulating that might be. For those with ADHD, we know that they will have challenge around their emotional regulation anyway. That sits within our executive functioning, that sits here in our frontal lobe. For those with ADHD, there's a disconnect between, our actions and the thoughts behind them. So although our emotions come from way back here in our primitive part of our brain, what we do with those emotions sits here. If we don't know how to regulate our emotions, if we don't know how to moderate our emotional responses, what we end up with is those primitive reactions of fear and anger and rage, upset, overwhelmed, shut down. So our internal systems, if we don't know how to regulate our emotions, we're going to be left exhausted. And transitions, again, I know I've mentioned it twice already. However, it's really, really important that changes to our routine, especially when they're unexpected, can be really, really dysregulating. How many times do we change the goalposts for our children and young people? Okay, so going back to masking. Like I said, we often associate masking with autism. And for those with ADHD, there's a high proportion of those with ADHD who will also be autistic. However, just, thinking about ADHD alone, we mask to fit in with social expectations. We mask how much mental, emotional, physical energy we're putting into things. We might become perfectionists to try and mask our challenges with our work and memory, with our organizational skills, with all of these different things. But masking creates a disconnect between how we feel, how we really are, and how other people see us. That amplifies stress. But often the more stressed we are, the more we mask to try and hold that in. So, that is a really big disconnect there. And then when people see us as being fine, oh, Lisa's fine, she's getting on with it. But really inside, I'm all like this. Well, then that often gives us an added layer of complexity because our needs are not being met. Our needs might be dismissed. Oh, they're all right. How dysregulation must that be? And if people don't understand where we're at, it's hard for them to put support into place, isn't it? And that will exacerbate all of those different feelings. So it's really important. Like I said, we will talk about strategies, but it's really, really important that we're able to identify what's happening for our children and young people so we can respond. The lack of appropriate support can be really, really challenges for us. So, thinking about accommodations that we might have in settings, are they appropriate? Are they meeting our need? We might need to manage environments that don't align with our needs. Think perhaps what I was saying before about our environment, about our sensory environment, who's around us, what's expected of us. When we don't have the structures to cope with everyday demands, think about how these stack up and stack up and stack up. So even though some of these things might be very small in themselves, when there's lots of them, they become really, really overwhelming. Often our ADHD children are under pressure to meet expectations. What I often hear from families is, support put in for a brief amount of time. When that support's put in and the child's doing well, then that support's removed. That can't happen with ADHD kids. It's like saying, okay, Lisa, put your glasses on, and when you can see down that corridor there, we're going to take them back off because you don't need them anymore. So think about what structure supports are in place, what our expectations are. So it's absolutely unrealistic to ask me to take my glasses off and to read something across the other end of the room. And likewise, when we're putting supports in for our children and young people, if we then take them away, we can't expect them to respond in the same way, to manage in the same way, and to excel in the same way. So often Our ADHDers are working so much harder to compensate for all of these challenges, including attention, including our sensory, including our social communications and the nuances there, including our impulsivity, including our need to move. There's an awful lot going on, isn't there? Executive functioning, like I said before, sits in the frontal part of our brain. It's the part of our brain that develops with us throughout our childhood and adolescence and matures somewhere in our 20s. In fact, researchers even saying as far as our 30s for some. Our executive functioning sits here. For those with ADHD, our executive functioning is probably about a third behind our peers in its development. We're not talking about IQ or anything like that here. We're just talking about our ability to use our executive functioning. So managing multiple demands is going to be really, really hard. How exhausting is that? Think about the mental effort that's required to organise, to plan, to complete even our daily tasks. Think about our children and young people who have challenge even organising how to put their uniform on of a morning. Which bit we need first? Can I do this while I'm watching the telly? How many of us have the child in front of the telly, piece of toast, one sock on, and we're like, come on, hurry up. Think about how overwhelming that might be. The more we're overwhelmed, the less we can function. So that burnout is really coming in there. And think about when we're balancing everything else that's expected of us with our executive functioning, schoolwork, social interactions, personal responsibilities. You may well be familiar with hyperfocus, and hyperfocus can be something absolutely amazing. For some of our children and young people, they can absolutely zone in into something that they're interested in, that catches their attention, that they're motivated by, that they're excited by, and they can be really, really productive. However, whilst hyperfocus can be productive, it can also drain everything else. When our children and young people are hyperfocusing, we might ignore everything else going on. We might neglect our other responsibilities, such as it's your turn to walk the dog, or you need to tidy up your toys, or put your PE kit in the wash bin. We might neglect our basic self-care. We might stay up all night, hyper-focusing and not get any sleep. For our older children and young people, we might forget to eat at lunchtime. We might forget to move. We might not listen to our bodies when we need to go to the bathroom. All of this can be really, really exhausting and can drain on our available resources. Some of you might have heard of the spoons theory. I absolutely love the spoons theory. It was developed by somebody called Christine Miserandino. And she developed it as a way of communicating to her friend how lupus affects her. So although it was designed to explain that, it's really good for anybody living with chronic illness, chronic pain, executive functioning challenges, any condition that means that we have limited resources. So the spoons represent the physical, mental, and emotional effort required to do anything in particular. It's called the spoons theory because she was in a cafe at the time and she was trying to explain to her friends. So she got a handful of teaspoons. She got 12 teaspoons and she said, okay, this is my physical, emotional, and mental energy for the day. Everything I do spends some of my energy. And this is how she described it. So for some tasks, it only spends 1 spoon. For some tasks, it might deplete all of her spoons. If all of her spoons are depleted, she doesn't have the mental, physical, or emotional energy to do anything else. She's in burnout. So think about for our children and young people, what uses their spoons? Getting out of bed might use a spoon in itself. Playing, with our friends, that might use a spoon. Yes, we're enjoying it. It's still taking our physical energy. Might still leave us a little bit tired. Watching our TV programs could use a spoon. Concentrating, following it could use our mental energy. Okay, think about having a shower. We've got to remember to get in the shower. We've got to remember to wash our hair. We've got to remember to use that product for our body, that product for our hair. It might use more spoons. Brushing our teeth. Might use 2 spoons to do that. Concentrating, reading, or, being involved in a task might use spoons. Looking at our 3 spoons list there. Getting on the school bus, public transport, lots of people we don't know, different sounds, smells, sights. Get dressed. Knowing what clothes we need to put on. Is it a hot day? Is it a cold day? Is this one scratchy? Is this one comfortable? Have I got to put my school uniform on? What order do I have to put these clothes in? School, how much effort, emotional, mental, and physical, does going to school take? Learning, concentrating on our learning. When we go to the supermarket, how many spoons does that take? The busyness, all of the choice, the noise, the smells. Feeling poorly, does that deplete our spoons? In crowds, when we're engaging with people we don't know, in social settings, does that deplete our spoons? So for each of us, these are going to be different. However, the concept is the same. We have a set amount of resource, and different things we do throughout the day deplete that resource. When we're depleted, we're absolutely in burnout. You might want to reflect on this theory in relation to your child. What do they find easy? What do they find difficult? How do we mitigate the difficult bits so they use less spoons? If you're interested in the spoons theory at all, there's lots online that you can Google and apply to your own settings. So, okay, what do we do? We've looked at perhaps how we can notice our children and young people may be feeling burnt out. We've looked at perhaps some of those reasons why. And we've looked at perhaps how that comes about. Think back to what I said before about that fizzy pop scenario, that every time something happens that's not expected or increasing the demand, that fizzy pop gets shook. I'm guessing lots of you know that analogy. And each time, little shake, little shake, little shake, until it's a big boom moment, a big emotional or big physical or big mental response that actually leaves us burnt out. So our spoons theory can help us gauge that. What do we do? What do we do? How do we help our children? So we might decide to reduce demands. Certainly on those high spoons day, where we know that there's going to be lots and lots and lots that are, pulling resources. How do we mitigate that? So avoiding or adjusting or amending emotionally provocative situations. So if we know our child always has a big emotional response to a certain situation, what can we do about that? If we know that our child has really, really big struggles of a morning before school, okay, what can we put into place to make that easier? If we know our child has really big struggles in the supermarket, what can we do? Could that be a hood? Could that be ear defenders? Could that be actually they go and sit with a friend or a neighbour for that time? So avoiding or amending those big emotionally provocative situations. Limit social interactions during burnout. So if we know our children are exhausted, reduce those social demands on them. Routine. Routine is absolutely great. Routine gives predictability. Predictability reduces anxiety. When we have predictability, we have a sense of control. We know what's going to happen. We know how it's going to happen. We know when it's going to happen. We feel in control. It's when those things are taken away from us that we feel out of control, isn't it? So putting routine in can help, mitigate that. When we have a task, when we have an instruction, breaking it down into manageable sections, break that, pare that right the way back, so our children, young people have less that they've got to keep in their working memory. External reminders are really good as well. Those external reminders might be visuals, might be pictures, might be timers, might be reminders in our phone or on our app. All of these types of things can help build in that sense of control and autonomy. Our children can take ownership of that for themselves. It's reducing demands because it's externalizing what's not happening internally. So if we've got external visuals, we don't have to remember it. If we've got alarms set, we don't have to struggle to structure our day. If we've got reminders, we can have that routine and that predictability. So those external reminders are a way of giving independence and autonomy and safety and control to our children and young people. Scheduling regular breaks to be able to take a minute, decompress. That decompression might look like having a play. It might look like having a snack. It might look like, I don't know, having a quick 10 minutes on our game. Regular breaks throughout the day replenishes our energy. Gives us another spoon back, if you like. Sensory regulation. So, think about when our children, young people are experiencing burnout, what can we do? Do we have to reduce the sensory input? Maybe calm spaces, quiet environments, noise cancelling headphones, reduce the light. Or do we add in sensory regulation, textures, movement, fidget, tactile tools? Look at our little guy there on the picture in his favourite cozy outfit that he feels comfortable in, and he can touch and he can feel. So sometimes adding in sensory input can help regulate us. Other sensory regulation techniques might be proprioception. So that proprioception could be by way of crunchy foods. Crunchy snacks, crackers, celery, crunchy things like that often help. Beg your pardon, I've just spotted a type of mistake there. That should say sipping cool drinks, not cold drinks. But sipping drinks through a straw, or, like those sports bottles, think about the effort it takes to do that. That in itself can give that sensory input to help calm things down. Weighted items like weighted blankets and things like that can help because of that gentle proprioception on us. So how many of us, when we're overwhelmed, do we pile up the blankets and the cushions and just sit? So having that soft pressure stimulation. Heavy work activities are really, really good at regulating us as well. Heavy work activities are anything that involves our big muscle groups. Carrying shopping in from the car is a really good one. Any toys that, mean push and pull, so pushing things around or pulling things. All of these heavy work activities work by lowering all of those stress hormones in our bodies. Linear movements. So linear movements, whether it's side to side or backwards and forwards. Think about how many of us feel comfort when we're moving in a car. Think about what we did when they were children and we pushed them in their push chairs, those linear movements. Any movements that, involve us going, all around and upside down and that are not likely to regulate us. However, those linear possibly are. So movement in a way that feels natural for the child and good and pleasant. Having the opportunity to unmask is really important. So being your authentic self. We do know that masking is just so impactful on people, on children, on young people, and on adults. And it's consistently one of the highest predictors of burnout. So if our children, young people are masking lots, let's have lots of opportunity where they can, unmask, be themselves, engage in their interests, have time alone if that's what they need. Just be their genuine selves. If that unmasking means having lots of physical movement, let that be so. If that unmasking means having a loud time, if that a quiet time with our pets, look at our little our little picture there. Often our pets can be really regulating and help us be just us, when nothing else in the whole world matters. It's just us. Okay, so our children, we know perhaps what's triggered it. We can identify it. We've looked at perhaps what we can do in the moment. Okay, how do we recover from burnout? It's important when somebody burnt out not to bombard them with demands, with expectations. So if we can reduce our language right down, we're not talking about just solely that functional language that we spoke about before, because functional language is often quite blunt, but reducing our language in an empathetic and supportive way can really help. Because if we're given instruction, our children and young people have to think about that instruction, understand it, and process it in a way in which they know what to do with that information. If we give that instruction in a big flowery sentence, how can they pinpoint what it is that we want? So if we're given instructions, make it clear, make it concise, so our children know what's expected of us. If we need to repeat it, we'll just think about that processing time, first of all, because it can take 10 seconds, 15 seconds for an individual, especially during burnout, to understand information, process it in a way in which they know what they're going to do with that information. So if we're making a demand, Lisa, put your shoes on. Come on, Lisa, put your shoes on. I've just asked you to put your shoes on. Come on, you still haven't put your shoes on. Think about how often we do this type of communication and reiteration. Every time I've just said that, I've said it in a slightly different way. For those with ADHD, that might come in as a slightly different request. And if each time they're having to process and process and process. So if we do need to repeat, make sure we've given that processing time. And then if we're going to ask again, try and use the same words in the same way. So it's not like another demand. Once we've done that, we might ask our child to feedback what we've just said. So that might be, yes, I'm going to get my shoes and put them on. Once my shoes are on, I'm going to get my bag and put my lunchbox in. So asking to feedback, it's a way of bringing them back out, engaging, but in a nice, calm way. So looking for patterns to preempt is important. So, you know your child better than anybody in the whole world. So you're best placed to be able to see those patterns that might mean that our children and young people are showing signs of burnout. Once we recognize them, it's important that we can help our children recognize, when things get tough, what led to that, what can we do from that? So if our children and young people know what overwhelms them and knows that the strategies that they can put into place, they're empowered, they feel more in control, which will lessen the burnout in the first place. It can help them plan ahead and lean on their strengths. As we know, there's lots of challenges around ADHD. However, there's lots of strengths as well. So if we can make sure that our children and young people can plan for when these challenges happen, by using their strengths. Again, it's giving them that sense of control in a situation that otherwise they might feel very out of control. We might want to practice scenarios to this. You know, when our child is regulated and calm, we might want to bring in different scenarios. If this was to happen, what could we do? Never do this in the moment, because when we're burnt out and overwhelmed, we won't have the cognitive ability to do that. However, once recovery's happened, we might say, if this was to happen in the future, what can we put into place? Doing that collaboratively, again, helps our child feel a sense of control and to be able to move with that control when that burnout starts. Okay, so giving them a sense of control into something that they would have normally felt completely out of control. So practicing those scenarios to develop that toolbox of strategies. Okay, in the supermarket, what can we do? If it's loud, what can we do? We could put our hood on. We could wear sunglasses. We could wear a peaked hat. I'm saying a supermarket just because that was where my son used to have really big challenges, but that could be in any setting at all. Helping our children bring these toolbox strategies themselves, building them, empowers them, gives them autonomy, helps them identify in other situations. So comic book strips, social stories can also be very, very helpful for that. It's about that personalized toolbox. And once we know where our challenge areas are, we can then respond to that. That's brought me to the end of my slides. I hope that that's given you a really good insight into ADHD burnout, how it comes about, what we might identify to let us know as parents and carers, what we can do, and how we can empower our children. If anybody has any questions, I'm very open to questions right now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lisa, for another great presentation. We've had a lot of questions come through, so we'll try and answer as many as we can. Our first question is, my 18-year-old son is doing his A-levels at school and he's overwhelmed. He has been staying in bed and avoiding going to school. What should I do to help him?
Okay, so it might be important to think about which element is causing the burnout. Okay, so he's refusing to go to school. What is it that he's avoiding in school? So he's doing his A-levels. There's lots of demand. Is it the demand of the work? Is it the demand of the situation? Is it the demand of his peers? So first of all, to try and drill down to what the challenge actually is can help us then identify the strategy to put into place. That staying in bed, not wanting to get up, think about that low motivation. I don't want to go into school, it's too hard, it's too overwhelming. Okay, first of all, let's think about what we can do in the moment to help him feel better in himself. So giving him strategies to lower his stress might be helpful. Giving him strategies to work out in his mind where his strengths and challenges lie. Okay, that might be helpful. Giving him grounding techniques when he feels things rising. So grounding techniques can bring us straight into the moment, so we can use sensory information to do that. We can use perhaps, those ground techniques, 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you could potentially reach out and touch. What would it feel like? 3 things that you can hear right now, 2 things that you can smell right now, 1 thing that you can taste right now. All of these grounding techniques bring us into the moment. So it takes us away from these spinning thoughts, brings us into the moment. So working on different elements that can help him regulate can then give a springboard, if you like, to be able to discuss other things. I'm wondering what his sleep pattern's like. So it might be worth, if he's not getting out of bed in the morning, Is it because he's shattered? Is it because he's not getting a good sleep? Is it because he's staying up all night worrying about the next day? So there could be lots and lots of different things that's impacting your son there. So I think really trying to pare that right back to see which individual bit is the main culprit. So if it's the sleep issue, well, let's look at the sleep bit first. Let's see how we can put in a healthy sleep routine for him first, so then he's not waking up exhausted. Because when we wake up exhausted, do you know what? We've got no spoons to start the day, never mind anything else that's coming up. So, I know that's not necessarily giving you a strategy to use in a minute, but if we can understand the underpinning causes and where that lies, that'll be the first one that we tackle, and then tackle all the others as they go along. I hope that makes sense.
That's great, Lisa. Thank you. Our next question is, many of the behaviours are the same as teenage hormones. How do you determine the difference between hormones and burnout?
That's really hard because do you know what? As teenagers and as hormonal teenagers, we're going to have that burnout as well. So regardless of what's causing it, our hormonal state will cause us to have these issues. So again, look at those, regardless of whether it's ADHD or whether it's teenageness, look at where those pinch points are, look at those emotionally provocative situations, and what can we do in those? What can we either remove, add in, or adjust for those particular points? So, I know lots of teenagers might have those big emotional responses around chores or school. Okay, so we would similarly look at, what we can do there. With our teenagers, we've got the added benefit of communication. Because when our children are little, they don't have the emotional vocabulary to be able to tell us. As our children, young people get older, their emotional vocabulary is building. Doing a piece of work, perhaps with your child, with your young person, about articulating our emotions can be really, really helpful and can perhaps unpick what's going on for them. When we think about emotions, we often think sad, happy, angry, fed up, frustrated. How do we communicate these? Often it's through outward behaviors, isn't it? So that outward behavior might be opposition, that might be shut down. If we increase our emotional intelligence by way of having different tools to articulate our emotions, having different words to articulate our emotions. Are we angry? Or are we confused? Or are we upset? Or are we just feeling dysregulated? So for every emotion, there's all of those underpinning things. So for our young people, empowering them by giving them emotional language to use can be really, really good for them to manage their emotional levels, to avoid burnout, and to communicate to others what it is that they actually need. Hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Lisa. Our next question is, what would you suggest for an ADHD teen who gets bored of routine and needs things changing regularly to keep him engaged? He is homeschooled and has a variety of clubs that he attends in the evenings and weekends.
Okay, so excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold at the moment. It's just drying my whole face up, so forgive me for me drink. I know I said that routine is an ADHD's friend. However, there still has to be an element of novelty because it's the novelty that keeps us engaged, keeps us motivated. And so although we need the predictability of the routine, if that's not working for your son as it is now, maybe look at that routine and just have pivotal points in our routine that we've got to stick to, but then have flexibility on the other bits. Give us an opportunity for novelty within that. Novelty might be led by, special interests or that type of thing. We were talking before about that hyper focus, weren't we? And enabling a little bit of hyper focus to be brought in can be really, really helpful. But when it's prolonged and expected, well, then that's when we burn out. But have a look perhaps at his routine. See where the non-negotiables are. Okay, so those non-negotiables at a very bare minimum, start, middle, ends. Non-negotiables is when you start your work. We've got to have a lunch at some point. We've got to have movement at some point, and then we'll end at some point. Even that structure gives us those pivotal points. We're still offering that safety, we're still offering that control, but we're given all these other opportunities in the middle for movement. And I don't just mean movement, physical movement, movement of activity, movement of choice. So adding in that element of choice may help motivate, lessen the perhaps the mental and emotional burden from the routine. I hope that makes sense in what it was you were asking me.
That was great advice, Lisa. Thank you. Can you recommend a handout to give to teaching staff, please, to help them understand?
On our website, there's a booklet for teachers. I can't remember the exact title of it right now, but the booklet there, we've got a number of booklets on the website for children, for teens, for parents, for adults, and for educators. Within that booklet, that does explain ADHD. It explains the motivators. It explains how we can potentially work with those strengths within ADHD to manage focus and concentration. It doesn't necessarily go into burnout as such. However, it does, I suppose, it does set those boundaries about what we're expecting from our children and young people. And if we can manage our expectations to a realistic expectation, well, then that in itself will lower the impact and lower the occurrence of burnout there. So I would suggest going online, downloading that, or sending them the link over. They can print it out in school. That is a really helpful handout.
That's great, thank you. How do you distinguish between ADHD and ASD burnout? My 10-year-old is undergoing burnout but is waiting to be diagnosed.
Right. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't. And there's a high proportion of people with ADHD who also are autistic. As a co-occurrence, that's the highest prevalence co-occurrence with ADHD. So we might be dealing with both anyway. And you know what? Does it really matter what's causing the burnout in terms of whether it's ADHD or autism? What's more important is looking at the situation, looking where the burnout is, whether it's emotional, physical, or cognitive, and how we can build in scaffolding to support that. So, certainly from my experience, my own family, thinking about less of, okay, which condition does this lie with? And more about, okay, what can I do about the situation as a whole? Because what we often find is, there's knock-on effects that when we target our, I don't know, our need for movement or our need for novelty, if we're also autistic, that battles with our need for sameness and our need for, predictability. So just thinking about which situations your child is finding difficult and how we can address each situation. I wouldn't worry too much about the which condition does it sit in.